So I would like to start this video by apologising to the entirety of England. I am from Greater London and I have a very, very vague understanding of the geography of the United Kingdom. I don't know why. Well, I do know why. It's because I'm a piece of shit, but it's okay because I have learnt today where the different counties, I think, in England specifically, are. It took me 45 minutes in total, which isn't too bad because that's kind of 1 minute per county. I'm going to go through the kind of tips and tricks that I ended up having to deploy because, oh my God, I was so unaware of where things were. Obviously, being British, I was aware of certain things. I knew which things were southern. I knew vaguely which some stuff was Midlands, and I knew vaguely some stuff that was northern. But to be honest, unfortunately, I do fall into that stereotype of if it's above London, I kind of assume it's north. And there were some areas where I had no idea where they were. Like I never thought about it. I've heard of all of these places, obviously, but I just never even thought to think, where do they actually belong? So that is me. Again, I sincerely apologise to the entirety of England. For now, let's just start with our gorgeous, gorgeous English counties. I'm just going to go from north to south because it's easiest. Northumberland was fairly easy to eventually remember because it's in the north. There's only two that I remember, two counties that have north, like actually just the word north in them, and that's Northumberland and Northampton. And I just knew Hampton was south, so it wasn't difficult for me to grasp that Northumberland was north. So obviously, if you're trying to learn these as, say, an American or someone who isn't from the UK, it's going to be slightly more difficult for you to follow because I have like some history, some very, very limited history in my head of where some of these countries are specifically. So we start with Northumberland. Going down to Cumbria. Cumbria took me a while. Again, I kind of knew it was north. I ended up just remembering it because, frankly, Cumbria, the first three letters are slightly funny. So that's how I ended up remembering where it was because I was like, okay, it's really big. The first three letters are funny. That makes it slightly more memorable. That's literally the only way I did it. County Durham. This one took me ages because, okay, I had no idea Durham was that far north. That just was completely mind-blowing to me. And then Tyne-on-Wear, again, I didn't really know where it was. I'm so sorry to County Durham and to Tyne-on-Wear. What I basically ended up doing was going, okay, Cumbria is there. Then there's another sea county, County Durham. And then because I knew of Tyne-on-Wear, I just remembered where it was. And again, that's not very helpful. That's not really a way of remembering things, but that's how I remembered it, was just like similar to Cumbria. Because it stuck in my mind, I know Tyne-on-Wear. So I was like, okay, well, that's where Tyne-on-Wear is. I never knew that, if that makes sense. Moving down, Lancashire, the only way I remembered it was thinking of it. I remembered it as it starts with the letters LAN. So does the word land. And I was thinking, that's ironic because there's no land next to Lancashire. That's literally the only way I can remember it. North Yorkshire, West Yorkshire, South Yorkshire, and East Riding of Yorkshire. Gorgeous. Why can't all of them just be bloody North, South, East, and West? How? I didn't know there was a North, East, South, and West Yorkshire. Is that crazy? I just knew of Yorkshire. And now I'm like, what? There are 4. So that's fascinating to me personally. But they were super easy to remember. You just remember like, okay, North is a big one. East Riding was, again, quite easy. And then the other ones just kind of, you could fit them in based on a compass. So that was really, really lovely. Greater Manchester, again, similar to Tyne-on-Wear. Obviously, everyone's heard of Manchester. So I was just like, oh, okay, cool. That's Manchester. So that was a fairly easy one to get just based on the fact that Manchester is so famous. Merseyside, so similarly to Lancashire, I just was like, well, it's on the side of the country because it's quite a weird shape as well. It was just slightly easier to remember from that. Below, Cheshire, and I'm so sorry to Cheshire. The only way I can remember it was like, it looks so vaguely like a cat. And it doesn't look at all like a cat. But that was the only way I can remember it. And the second I thought, oh, it kind of looks like a cat, it started looking like a cat to me, even though it doesn't look anything like a cat. Nottinghamshire, so similar to Cheshire, I was like, well, it looks like a knot. this like deformed oval looks exactly like a knot, doesn't it? And it's like, no, it doesn't. I don't know how on earth I can convince myself that these things look like the things that they do not look like, but that's what I managed to do. Then Lincolnshire, I remembered because I was like, again, I've heard of Lincolnshire. I've had a sausage in my past, but I didn't know Lincolnshire was so big. So that's how I remembered it. And then directly juxtaposing that, Rutland was super easy to remember because I was like, it's so small. It's like, it's the smallest one other than Bristol, I guess. So I was just like, boom, Rutland, super easy. Leicestershire, I just remembered as it's the middle of the country, basically. So that's how I remembered Leicestershire. I already know what Leicestershire is, or I've heard of it before. So I'm like, okay, Leicestershire is in the middle, which doesn't help people who haven't really heard of Leicestershire before. Unlike my super helpful Cheshire and Nottingham, where it's like, well, just look for the one that looks like a cat or a knot. Staffordshire, literally, this was so difficult. And the only way I could get it was there's a tiny little bit protruding below Staffordshire that kind of like hugs the West Midlands. And the way I remembered it was that's like a staff. Shropshire and Herefordshire, all I could think of was Shropshire begins with CH. No, it doesn't. It begins with SH, like sheep. And then below, Herefordshire is like a type of cow, I think, a Herefordshire cow or a Hereford. I don't know. But I was thinking sheep and cows. That's the only way I can remember them. And it worked. I can remember Shropshire and Herefordshire based on sheeps and cows. We don't need to go into any more detail about the way my brain works. Next to that, we have West Midlands, Worcestershire, and Warwickshire. Now, Warwickshire, I remember because it looks like a kind of whale. If you think of it as like kind of a large head and then almost like a little fishy tail. So that's how I remembered Warwickshire. Then West Midlands, I used to work for a company and I used to deal with the West Midlands area. So similar to Tyne-on-Wear or to Manchester, I was just like, oh, that's where the West Midlands is. So it stuck in my mind. And then Worcestershire, I remembered because the three W's for some reason are next to each other. So I was like, okay, that's the other W. So that's how I remembered them. Unfortunately, I really don't have, I suppose I was going to say the other way to remember West Midlands is it's kind of in the west and it's kind of in the middle, but that's kind of the same as Worcestershire. So it's really difficult to know which one is which, but it's just, that's how I remembered it. And I'm so sorry. And then linking to the one above, which is Derbyshire. I've never heard of this county before. And the way I remembered it is above Warwickshire, which is like a fish. And Warwickshire, I remembered it as it's like a whale. But then I also thought, but it's also similar to a dolphin. And Derby begins with a D. Therefore, Derbyshire is the one above the dolphin. So as you can see, I can make anything be anything depending on how I need to remember it. So it shows how unhinged and very, very loose my memory kind of palace, shall we say, is. But nonetheless, it worked. I always remembered where Derbyshire was. Congrats to me. Northamptonshire is fucking annoying because it is at least two counties above Hampshire. And so in my head, I was like, okay, well, it's north of Hampshire. And then I just had to count. Okay, it's for some reason considerably north of Hampshire, even though it is Northamptonshire. But I can only assume they're connected. And I assume this must be a historical thing, but that's how I remembered it. I was like, okay, it's north of Hampshire and it isn't Berkshire and it isn't Oxfordshire, so that's North Hampshire. Bloody annoying, but what's a girl to do? Cambridgeshire, again, everyone's heard of Cambridge. So Cambridge and Oxford, I kind of worked as juxtaposing counties because that's essentially what they are. So Oxford and Cambridge, they're also kind of similar-ish in shape and size. So I just remembered Oxford was on one side, Cambridge was on the other. That's the only way I can remember it. I'm so sorry. These aren't well-formed thoughts, but this is how I remember them, as Oxford is on one side of Northamptonshire and Cambridge was on the other. And in between them, I was thinking of Buckinghamshire as like Buckingham Palace, and it's super fancy. That's why it's next to Oxford, because obviously Oxford is quite fancy as well. And then Bedfordshire, I just remembered Bedfordshire as being above Herefordshire because I sleep on my front, so my heart is on my bed. I don't think there needs to be no more explanation of that, really. Move along to Norfolk and Suffolk. This is pretty easy because I knew what region Norfolk and Suffolk were in. Well, I knew what region Norfolk was in. Suffolk I thought was a bit more south because of its name, but once I knew Norfolk and Suffolk were, essentially the north and south of each other, I was like, oh, okay, Norfolk, Suffolk. Easy. Essex also easy because I'm from Greater London. I know Essex is to the east of London, so that was a fairly easy one to do. Hertfordshire, I just did as London, and again, I apologise to the rest of the country. London is kind of like the heart of the country. It is where a lot of stuff goes on. So I was just like, okay, just above London, the heart of the country, just above the heart of the country is the bed because we sleep on our fronts. See how it all makes sense? See how easy it is? Greater London is the area around London. City of London is obviously just London. That was fairly easy. Kent, I knew Kent was slightly to the side. So again, I'm sorry, I don't really have Kent and Surrey. I just know where they are because they're kind of like neighbouring counties. So that was the only way I knew that. East and West Sussex, obviously one is in the west, one is in the east, similar to Norfolk and Suffolk. Once I knew where they vaguely were, it was pretty easy just to place them every time. Berkshire, I remember as just being a fucking Berk because I was like, why can I never remember where this is? I had no idea Berkshire was so close to London. Is that weird to say? I've heard of it. Obviously, I've heard of all of these places, but I was like, I just didn't know it was there. I would never have guessed it was there. That just isn't something I would have guessed. So I just thought of it as like, it's a Berk. It's just in the wrong place. Hampshire, similar to so many of these other poor counties. I'm so sorry to them. I was just like, that's where Hampshire is. In Surrey, maybe, there's like an area called Ham and an area called Hampton and this kind of thing. So I knew it was near Surrey. And so that's how I remember where it is. Below Isle of Wight, fairly easy. It's an island. I remembered the Isle of Wight because it's an island. Gloucester, have I done? Yeah, Gloucester and then Wiltshire was a struggle. And I just remember them as they're quite famous for cheese. And I just thought, okay, Gloucester is G and then Wiltshire is W. Alphabetical order, super easy. Bristol and Somerset. Bristol is the smallest, super easy. Somerset, again, if you're from the UK, I think most people will know the general region that Somerset is in. So once I was like, oh, okay, that one's Somerset. It was pretty simple from there. And then Cornwall, Devon and Dorset are also just in alphabetical order. Again, similar to a few of these, the basic region, certainly that Cornwall and Devon are in. And so it was, once I got that, it was fairly easy to flow through to just get the alphabetical order. So yeah, that was my very slightly unhinged way of remembering all of these counties. Again, super duper apologies to every single county. I am the terrible person for not knowing where the county was originally, and now I know, and now I feel like a better person for knowing, and I feel like a worse person for not knowing. So I'm pleased that I've been able to grow, and I'm pleased that you have allowed me the space to grow. So thank you very much, and I hope that you are very happy in your county. And please let me know what's good about your county, because there must be so much. Mostly cheese. Most of these places I'm like, I know because of cheese, so maybe cheese. Just in terms of how well I did, it took me 45 minutes and I think I did 9 attempts. I started off with 254 clicks, which includes the 48 correct ones. So gives you an idea. That went down to 200, then 176. Then somehow I went from 176 to just 76. Then I bounced back up to 89, which I think obviously the 76 was either a fluke or I had quite a few early ones, which I knew, and then I could kind of stop just randomly clicking everywhere. So the 76 was a fluke. And then I went 55, 54, and then I did 248 just to check because I was super aware of the order can affect how it goes. But overall, not too bad. Clearly, I think between 176 and then just 76, I obviously spent actually some time thinking, okay, how do I actually remember these things? Because just clicking isn't clicking, as it were. And I'm pleased I got there.